a lot of times we want to, share Christ with people, but we don't have any relationship with them. You've got to have a relationship with people before you start, you gotta earn their trust and you gotta earn their friendship. Because when you start talking about God, it's a heavy thing. And you start talking about a life change that they need to have. There's a whole wrestling match that's going to go on in their life after that.
Welcome to the Christian Music Archive podcast. Conversations about Christ, community, and music. I'm your host, Dave Maurer. Each week I chat with a musical guest who is listed on the pages of the Christian Music Archive. There are thousands of creative men and women who have helped shape the soundtrack of the Christian faith. And we get to hear their stories, learn about how Christ has made a difference in their life, and hopefully, along the way, we'll learn how we can be a better part of our community. One of the things you've probably noticed about this podcast is that there are no commercials. Now, I understand the need for advertising to help pay for various expenses, but so many times I feel like those announcements just get in the way. That is why I've chosen to ask you to partner with me through Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding platform that allows you to support the projects and causes that you believe in. And when you join Patreon in support of the Christian Music Archive, you help pay for the monthly hosting, production costs, and marketing opportunities that help spread the word about the work we are doing. So if you believe in remembering the women and men who have contributed to the soundtrack of our faith, I'd love for you to join and help out as a sponsor. Head over to patreon.com/ccmexchange to learn how you can sponsor the work that I'm doing. That's patreon.com/ccmexchange. And when you become a sponsor, you're helping us document the rich and amazing history of Christian music. So jump over to patreon.com/ccmexchange today. And thanks for being a patron of Christian music. Today I'm privileged to be chatting with Lenny LeBlanc. Lenny got his start in music back in the 70s and had a couple of top 40 mainstream hits. I first became aware of Lenny LeBlanc when I was in radio spinning the title cut from his debut 1983 Christian album, Say a Prayer. He has gone on to write a number of worship songs like There Is None Like You and Above All, for which he won a Dove Award, I think, back in 2003. And in addition to more than a dozen solo albums, he's been a bass player and a studio musician, working with the likes of Amy Grant, Ricky Skaggs, Don Moen, Twila Paris, and, well, you get the idea. Lenny's a busy guy. So it is with great honor that I welcome to the podcast Lenny LeBlanc.
Good to be with you, Dave.
Well, the Christian Music Archive is striving to document the music and spiritual histories of the musicians we love. And for a lot of people, those are two separate stories that often come together at some point. So if you don't mind, let's start your story with your musical beginnings. How did you get started in the music business?
Well, it was really by accident. I was 15 years old, and a friend of mine and I grew up on the east coast of Florida in Daytona Beach, and we would go surfing every day after school. And so we'd been to the beach and we came home. He had a car, and so we stopped by his house, and his brother and several of his little friends were in the living room with their electric guitars, and they were playing songs that were on the radio,
Yeah.
And of course we knew them, and they looked at us and they said, "Hey, why don't one of you guys come over here and sing?" And so we looked at each other like, "You're crazy. We can't sing. We're not singers. We're surfers," And so they kept on playing, and I just sort of got really interested in it. And I walked over there and picked up the sheet music. I knew the songs. One was "House of the Rising Sun."
Oh, sure.
Not a great Christian song, but it was a song at that time. It was big on the radio. And so I started singing, and they looked at me and they said, "Wow, you sound really good." I said, "What? Really?" They said, "Yeah. Let's put a band together and enter the talent show at school, at junior high." And so I said, "Talent show? You think I've got talent?" They said, "Yes." And so we entered the talent show, and we did that song and one other song by the Animals, I think. And we won. And I was so nervous. I had never done anything in front of anybody. And I had my hands in my pockets and my back to the audience. I couldn't even face the people. And somehow we won. Then they got really excited, and they said, "You need to get a bass." And I didn't even know what a bass was. And so they showed me a little bit about it, and I went down to Ecker's drugstore and I got a job washing dishes and saved my money. And 2 months later, I bought a bass guitar, and a couple of years later, I was making a living at it in the clubs.
Wow. So you started probably pretty regionally, right? Playing around Daytona Beach and
Right, because I was still in high school, and I left high school right after I graduated. My mom gave me a one-way ticket to New York City, and I was going to go seek my fortune.
mm. So at some point you recorded an album that came out, and I think it was called Hound Dog Man, right back in the mid '70s.
Well, actually, it was that title was originally called just Lenny LeBlanc, and it had a song that a friend of mine wrote about Elvis before he died.
Okay.
And we released the record, and it was kind of a door opener for me in the secular world. And so then about 6 or 8 months later, Elvis died, and they took that song and re-released it as a single and sent it to every radio station in the country and re-released the album entitled Lenny LeBlanc Hound Dog Man.
Mm.
And so there's two versions of that album out there.
So did that kind of pave the way then to working with Pete Carr, or was that before
Well,
that?
Pete had already produced that record. Pete and I go back to Daytona Beach, where he grew up there and I grew up there. We were teenage friends and had a few bands together. He had originally played with the Allman Brothers in a band called the Hourglass.
Okay.
In California. They had a record deal with Liberty Records, and he was actually a guitar player, but he played bass on those two records. And when that band split up and the Allman Brothers were forming, he came back to Daytona Beach, and he and I had a band. And then he moved. Right around that time, he moved here to Muscle Shoals and started a session guitarist career, and played on all those huge hits that were cut here in Muscle Shoals, like all the Bob Seger hits, or Main Street and all the Rod Stewart things that were cut here, and all the staple singers. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so when I moved here in '73, it was because of him,
Okay.
And so he became my producer, my publisher, and so he produced that first record, and then he was doing solo electric guitar records for Atlantic Records as well. And so the record label had the idea of teaming us up together as LeBlanc and Carr, and that's how that all kind of came to be in.
Kind of like the Loggins and Messina and all of those other duos of the day.
Yeah, right. In the '70s, duos were big.
Yeah. So then you guys did an album together, which had some pretty successful tunes on it, right?
Oh, yeah. Falling was a big record. It stayed in the charts 27 weeks.
Wow. And so then, but you guys only did one record. What happened there?
Right. Well, we only did one record and started touring, and he figured out he didn't like touring about a month into it. So we had the same manager as the Rolling Stones and Lynyrd Skynyrd, and so we got booked on the Skynyrd tour, the tour that the plane crashed on.
Oh, wow.
And so after that, he kind of got disillusioned with it and really just wanted to stay home and produce. He was kind of a studio guy, and he loved working in the studio. So I went on and toured, and the record label wanted to do another LeBlanc and Carr album, but I said, well, there is no LeBlanc and Carr,
Right.
There's only one guy out there touring, and so that kind of ended it. And I went on and did a solo record for Capitol Records, and then I became a believer after that.
So during your musical beginnings, what was your life like for you?
We'd struggle as young musicians, early on until I moved here in Muscle Shoals and started doing sessions. That kind of all clicked for me. But before that, it was just kind of living week to week, wherever you could get a club gig or this and that, and just kind of, and I like making things with my hands. I built furniture for 40 years. And so I would do stuff on the side. I'd build a deck for a friend, especially after I, made the transition into Christian music. I was signed to Capitol Records, but they wouldn't let me out of my contract.
Oh, yeah.
And so I went for 2 years until they finally let me out. So I had to make a living somehow. I couldn't write songs. I couldn't make records.
Right.
Because I was contractually held up. And so, yeah, just make a living any way you can, sort of like it is today with musicians. It's even tougher now with streaming and now all this virus stuff,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, now I read somewhere that you really didn't turn your life over to Christ. In fact, you just mentioned that until you were in your 30s. Let's talk about how that decision came about. What was it that said, oh, I need to start looking at what a relationship with Jesus might look like?
Yeah, I was actually 31 years old, and I had just recorded that album with Capitol, and I think we had a top 50 single on that. And so they exercised the second option,
Mm-hmm.
which meant I needed to do another record for them. And so I would try to, write those songs. And right about this time, a friend of mine that had been to Vietnam, he was like an older brother to me. He called me late one night and said, "Lenny, I got saved." And he had become a smuggler in the meantime.
Mm.
And he had boats and planes and ship captains and pilots working for him and his partners. They were big time smugglers. They weren't like little dope dealers.
Oh, okay.
And yeah. And so he called and said, "Lenny, I got saved and I'm going to heaven and I want you to be there with me. Are you saved?" And I thought, man, just when things are going good, I was
Right.
I was not looking for God.
Yeah.
God was not, that was the last thing on my radar screen, but something about his voice just really struck me deep. I knew something profound had happened to him, and I wanted to hear more about it. So he said, "I'm going to send you a book." And so he sent me the Bible, and he sent me this little book about the last days, the end times.
Uh-huh.
So I started reading the Bible for the first time, really, in my house, and God began to show me how shallow my life was. I began to see myself like the rich young ruler. I had all this success. I was doing well financially. I'd left my family 6 years before for my career. My career was my God. He started exposing just who I was, at the core.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw myself as the woman at the well. Even though I wasn't a woman, she had many relationships and nothing ever worked out. And I thought if I could find the right person to share all this with, my life would be fulfilled, and that never happened. And until I got saved, actually. But so I started reading the Bible, and God began to reveal himself to me, reveal his forgiveness and his mercy and his love to me. And I just melted in my house, Dave. I would go after day, and I would just fall to my knees and ask forgiveness for things that I'd remembered, and I didn't know who to share it with. I didn't know a Baptist from a Methodist. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know how to come to God. And that little book about the end times had a little prayer at the end of every chapter that you could pray and ask God into your heart. So I'd get down on my knees and pray that prayer after every chapter. It had about 18 chapters. So I got saved about 18 times that month.
Really tie the knot solid, right?
Yeah. And then I'd go out on the front porch and I'd look across the street and I'd say, those trees have never been that green.
Wow.
And just stuff like that. My heart began to change about things. And I was just born again right there in my house. I didn't walk an aisle. I didn't shake a preacher's hand. And that just goes to show you that God is big.
Yeah.
And he can come to you anywhere if you just invite him. He's there,
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you're at or what kind of condition you're in. And then I started meeting other people that were believers. We had sort of a little revival in the music community about then. So I started meeting some other guys that had gotten saved too. And, eventually got plugged into a church.
And began that transition. Well, I've been very aware lately of several stories, and you mentioned the woman at the well, but about people who have an encounter with Christ will have their lives changed. I think of the shy shepherds out in the field who, after they had an encounter with the baby Jesus, went back and told everybody about it.
Right.
And you talked about the woman at the well who, after she was confronted by Christ, she also went back and told everybody. So my question to you, after you encountered Christ after reading that book, what was that transition like? Were you, you had some contractual obligations, obviously. Did your songwriting change immediately, or was that a slow transition?
It was a rocky transition, to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was signed to Capitol Records, and we had at Muscle Shoals Sound. It was the big recording studio here, and they had the record deal. They had all the big records that were recorded here. And them and Fame Studios are the two big studios that kind of brought this place on the map. And so they had a subsidiary label with Capitol, and I was signed to that label, and I was also a staff writer. So, when I got this transformation happen in my life, I started to write those songs for that record to complete my contractual obligations. And I would start out writing a pop song, and by the time it got to the chorus, it'd be about Jesus. And I thought, Capitol's not going to want these Jesus songs. And they didn't. And I had no desire to write the other stuff. It wasn't like, okay, now you're a Christian, you can't do this pop record,
Right.
It wasn't that at all. I would have had no qualms about doing the pop record. But I just had a different desire. God took the desire away from me. It was like, it wasn't important to me anymore. Even making a record wasn't important to me anymore. I just wanted to if I was going to write songs, I wanted to write songs about this God that changed my life.
Yeah.
And so my manager thought I'd lost my mind. My friends thought I'd lost my mind. Capitol Records thought I'd lost my mind. And so I had to get what's known as a musician's worst nightmare, a real job for,
Yeah.
because, Christian Records, Sparrow Records wanted to sign me, but it was going to cost $30,000 just to get the contract away,
Oh, yeah.
And that was big money back then for a Christian record. They only spent $25,000 on their biggest artist, and they would have had to spend more than that just to get me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I went for 2 years and just, made a living however I could, build a deck for a friend, or I started a little stained glass company. I made stained glass windows, and, I just did what I had to do, and I never missed a bill. God was faithful, and eventually made the transition into Christian music. And he even struggled for 5 or 6 years after that,
Did your popularity in the mainstream help with the reception of your music, or did you receive some of that same kind of, oh, here's somebody trying to make good on this new Christian music scene?
No, I think they knew my story was legit, and I didn't have to go there. It wasn't a decision that I made because my other career was failing. It was a total opposite. And at that time, a lot of Christian artists were trying to cross over into pop, and I'm thinking, why are they doing that?
Right.
I'm going the other way. And so, yeah, I think radio was really open to me because, oddly enough, a lot of the DJs that were in Christian music at that time were formerly pop DJs, and they played my records. And so, it was kind of a great transition for me. And also an artist named Michelle Pilar.
Oh, sure.
Recorded her first record here in Muscle Shoals. And a friend of mine was producing it, and she was looking through his records as they were doing the recording, and she saw my LeBlanc and Carr album, and she said, "Oh gosh, I love this guy's voice. I'd give anything if he could sing on my record." And my friend said, "Well, he lives here, and he just got saved like 6 months ago." And so she got in contact with me and ended up pulling 2 of her songs off of her record and putting 2 of mine on it.
Oh, wow.
And then created a duet with one of them, and it became a big hit. It was called "You Were There All Along."
Yeah.
And it was a big Christian hit. And so that was kind of an introduction for me into Christian radio before my records even came out.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it was pretty neat how that happened.
Yeah. Well, you released 2 or 3 albums of which I would consider Christian pop, and then you started getting into worship music. What was that transition like for you?
Well, it was that kind of started from the first months I became a believer. I started going to this little church, my wife and I, and the piano player quit. And she said, "Lenny, will you play piano?" And I had a piano in my bedroom, but I really wasn't a piano player. I'm a guitar player. And so I was kind of thrust into that little position at church. And so I would play, and then I began, had a desire to write songs that would relate to my generation, because the songs we were singing were like, "All day long I've been with Jesus. It has been a wonderful day." Stuff like that. It was like camp meeting songs. We're in the Bible Belt here.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, if I invite my friends here, they're going to think this is goofy, And so I started writing songs just out of the desire to reach my friends and to reach, people that were young,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it was born. And then I began leading worship at church, and that was a whole experience too, because there was half the church that didn't want to go forward and do the contemporary stuff, and half of them did. So that was like a war. We call it the worship wars.
Yeah.
Where you couldn't bring an electric guitar in the church, or it was of the devil.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I tell these guys now that bring all this stuff. They got lights, they got smoke, they got camera. I say, you guys don't know how good you got it.
Really. Well,
Yeah.
I was just talking a few weeks ago with an A&R director at Integrity, and they mentioned that, or he mentioned that a lot of the early Hosanna stuff was recorded because Integrity Hosanna got this music truck that they would go around to different churches and record music. Was that how you got hooked up with Integrity?
Actually, a friend of mine, Charlie LeBlanc, who's not related to me, I produced him and his wife's records, And he was from St. Louis, and he knew Tom Brooks, who was the producer of all the early Integrity Hosanna records.
Okay.
And he said, "Man, I need to introduce you to Tom and get you singing on some of these records." And so I got introduced to Tom, and I would go up and sing as a background vocalist on a lot of the early Hosanna records. I'm probably on about 7 out of 10 of them. I'm singing as a background singer.
Okay.
All the Ron Canoli records and all those early things, all the early Don Moen records. And so I met Don Moen there one night at Tom's. He just happened to be in there in the studio.
Yeah.
And he said, "We need to do it. We need to let you lead worship on one of these records." And so they came to my church, and actually a lot of the stuff was recorded in the studio. The tracks were recorded in the studio, and then they'd bring them to the church, and they'd record their worship leader and maybe a choir live along with the soundtrack. And some of them were recorded, that had a bigger budget, were recorded live with the truck, like the Ron Canoli records, and they were videoed. Just depended on what kind of budget there was for the record.
Sure. So you got hooked up with them, and was Don running Hosanna Integrity at the time?
Yeah, he was the vice president of the label, and he was kind of in charge of who got signed, and who didn't. I mean, he was the one that brought Hillsongs to the label.
Okay. So you started with them more as a writer, but you also were doing background vocals. What was the transition to where you actually started?
Well, I actually started with them as a background singer. Before that. I started with Maranatha.
Oh, okay.
I wrote for them for about a year and did one solo record for them. Actually, 2 records. One with Kelly Willard and Bill Batstone and Rita Balash, Paul Balash's wife.
Okay.
It was called The Red Letters, Songs from the Red Letters. And so, yeah, I'd done a few things with them and then transitioned into a relationship with Integrity as a background vocalist. And then as a songwriter, I never really wanted a exclusive songwriting agreement after that, because I was writing more than just worship songs. I would write a few positive country songs. Like I had a Ricky Skaggs recorded one of my songs. I had one of my songs called Treat Her Right that was on one of the Integrity records that a group called Sawyer Brown, a country band, recorded it, and they had a #1 country record on it.
Yeah.
So I really didn't want to be an exclusive writer.
Okay.
And so I would just, give Integrity a portion of my publishing. We had a deal where we just split it down the middle. So it was an incentive for them and an incentive for me as well.
As we mentioned, you met Don Moen, and that's a significant introduction, because you've gone on for the last, 20 years or so to tour with Don, right?
Huge part of my life, Don Moen is. Not only signing me to the label, but, when it came time to do another record, I didn't have an exclusive recording contract, so we just went record by record. Are they going to do another record or are they not? I never knew.
Yeah.
And so Don would always be in the meetings, and he said the accountants would say, "Look, we can't do another Lenny record. Look what his last one sold. It didn't really sell,
Yeah.
And then Don would go back and get the publishing statements and bring them out. He said, "Yeah, but look what his songs made us. a #1 country record. There's None Like You, one of the most recorded songs in the history above all.
Yeah.
And so he would say, "Yes, we're doing another Lenny record." And so, during that time when I was making those records, Don was touring all over the world, and I would see him and I'd say, "Don, just let me go with you. I'll sing backup for you, and I'll just play acoustic guitar and sing backup for you. I don't have to sing any songs. I just want to go with you." And he always thought he never took me serious, and I would tell him time after time. And finally he said, "You're too good to go with me and be a background singer and a guitar player." I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "I want to go." And so he finally let me go. And man, it's just been amazing. We've traveled the world together like probably 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were just in Houston together last weekend,
So what was it that caused you to be so insistent on being on the road with Don?
I just felt there was a connection there, and I really wanted to go to the nations. I really just wanted to see other places and to, worship with other countries. And I would get emails from all over the world about my songs, how they were touching people in India and Africa and Asia. And I said, I want to go meet these people. I want to go worship with them, and because of Don, I got the ability to do that.
Well, one of the things when I first started this podcast that I hoped was that we would be able to talk about the importance of community, because I think that in the past decade or so, we have really lost that as a country, as a world, as a culture. And
Yeah.
I heard from what you shared with us so far, I've heard two community stories that I think are really important. One is your buddy who said, "Hey, Lenny, I've just become a Christian and I want you to be there too." Talk about the importance of that relationship and what made it that you were open to what he had to say.
I think a lot of it has to do with the credibility of who you're around and who you know and what they know of you. You know, with him, I knew him as a person. He would sleep between my brother's bed and mine on the weekends. He was
Mm.
6'4", and we would wake up on a Saturday morning and he was laying on the floor between our beds. You know, that's how far back we go.
Yeah,
So I knew him to the core. You know,
yeah,
and I respected what he was saying, even though I might not have known much about it. I wanted to hear about it because I knew him and I knew who he was. And I think a lot of times we want to, you know, share Christ with people, but we don't have any relationship with them.
yeah.
And you've got to have a relationship with people before you start, you know. It's different if you're in the pulpit preaching. That's different. I'm
Sure.
talking about one on one. You want to reach people. You gotta earn their trust and you got
Yeah,
to earn their friendship. Because when you start talking about God, it's a heavy thing, and you start talking about a life change that they need to have. You know, there's a whole wrestling match that's going to go on. Going to go on in their life after that. You know, when they finally say yes, okay, God, is this real? You know, then the wrestling match starts.
yeah. I work with an organization that does compassion care around the world, and their philosophy is you have to have that relationship. You have to fill empty
Yeah,
stomachs. You have to uh,
yeah,
teach people who don't have a living in order for them to be interested in hearing your story and to earn the
right.
right to hear your story. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So then it's fun for me because my hope in these community relationship conversations, when I talk about this, is a lot of people are talking about what they're getting. But then your relationship with Don is community in the reverse of that, in the giving of yourself to Don and his ministry.
Well, uh, I don't know how to explain how that is, but I guess it's just I don't know. I just seen him and I watched him and he, you know, we go to these foreign countries. Like we went to Uganda and we had the president's security team.
Mm,
We had the first lady of Uganda welcomed us into her house.
wow.
And every time we go somewhere, the vice president wants to meet with him. Some big politician wants to meet with him. The president wants to meet with him. He's like an ambassador to the nations for Christ. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he has such integrity. He's like Billy Graham. I mean,
Hmm.
he's such the real deal that you just want to be involved with him. And that's what I felt. That's what I sensed. He was just so real. And I said, I want to be with this guy. I want to partner with him. And whether I have a back seat or a side seat, I don't really care. I just want to partner with him and learn from him, you know.
And that community has gone on to be a two-way street, obviously. I mean, you've provided support and encouragement to him, and vice versa. He's provided that to you.
He really has. And you know, I sort of made a transition the end of last year and decided I wasn't going to travel anymore.
Mm, yeah.
And this is before all the virus stuff even happened. But I just felt like, you know, I've done about 2.5 million miles in coach, not business class like he flies. I said,
All right.
I think I'm done, Don. And so he's not letting me get over it. So I started designing houses actually in the
Right.
last, the first of the year. And so I really love that. I'm just a creative person and I love creating things and building things. And so, you know, I'll still do, you know, some traveling with him, but I've sort of just taken a different path. I think I'm just in a different season, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and you mentioned this early on when you were trying to pay bills between record deals. You started doing woodworking, and
Yeah.
I jumped on your Facebook page, and oh my goodness, saw some of the stuff that you've done and the houses that you've designed. That's an amazing, impressive stuff that you've done. Talk a little bit about how that became kind of a passion for you.
Well, my wife and I had a really beautiful home on 20 acres, and it was, you know, I was mowing all 20 acres, and it was more than we really needed. And so we put that house up for sale, and I started learning CAD software to design homes,
Okay.
so we could build another house, smaller one, you know. And so it took like a year and a half to learn that software. It's pretty heavy duty stuff, and so I got really proficient at it after I designed this house we're living in now and built it. I built this house myself,
Okay.
And so after we moved in, I had a few people approach me about doing home plans for them. So I did a few house plans, and then I was approached by a young builder here who was builder of the year last year. He's a really great builder, builds some incredible houses, and uses a lot of state of the art techniques. And so we kind of teamed up, and I've been doing their designs, and I've done 14 house plans
Wow.
since the first of the year. Yeah, yeah, it's really exciting. I love doing it.
So you had mentioned that this is kind of a new season of life for you. Do you find, I don't know how to ask this question. Talk about the call of the Lord on your life in this season when it may not be in front of crowds. How does God's call on your life transition into the work that you're doing now?
I think we sometimes get caught up in too much in what we do rather than who we are. And I think that God can use us anywhere. And I'm around a lot of non-believers
Mm-hmm.
uh, as I'm doing this new venture. And it's really kind of exciting because I get to make friends with people and drop a hint here and there, about Jesus, and it's amazing what how God can use you in those different situations if you just be open to it. And, for a while when I was younger, I thought my career was my identity in a lot of ways, and instead of my identity being in Jesus, and the older I got, the more I realized that career is not going to be around forever,
Yeah.
but Jesus is, and your identity needs to be in Him. And so this transition, even though I love music, I've been doing it all my life, and I almost got tired of doing it. I know that sounds bad, but I just got bored with it. Not bored with reaching out and doing worship concerts and worshiping, that, not that part of it, but just the thinking about making another record, and oh my gosh, I got to do an Instagram now, I got to do a video now. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just so over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That part of it. So, and I know that's part of it, but it's not part of it for me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you said, that the focus is on God has a relationship with us and wants us to be using that in whatever circles we're in.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
think,
wherever.
yeah, and I think a lot of times, especially, well, I'm just saying it this way. I think a lot of times we go, God, I'm going to do something amazing and great for you today. I'm going to go solve this problem, or I'm going to do this. And really what Jesus wants is us to be in relationship with the people that He puts around us.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't feel any pressure anymore.
So have you hung up the writing pen permanently, or do you still dabble? Or
I think just for a season.
yeah,
I know I'll write again, and I'll pick it up again, and I'll continue to do a few concerts, in the U.S. When the opportunity arises with Don, and I just have to put super glue on the tips of my fingers because my calluses are all gone.
right, right.
But I can get through a night,
One of the things that we do, and on a weekly basis, we send out a prayer letter to our team and ask to pray for specific artists. How can we be specifically praying for you in the days and weeks to come?
Just that I'll stay on the right path, and that I'll continue to follow the Lord and stay true to Him.
I'd like to thank Lenny LeBlanc for spending time with us today. You can learn more about Lenny LeBlanc and his music on our website, thechristianmusicarchive.com. Once you are there, click on the Artist tab and search for Lenny LeBlanc to see his discography, read about his life story, and see some of the projects that he's worked on. I've also got links to his website and social media profiles there as well. While you are there, you can also look for some of your other favorite artists. I've documented more than 10,000 albums and nearly 2,000 people from a huge variety of genres and decades. And I'd like to invite you to come back again next week when I have another great interview all queued up. But until then, remember this: God loves you. In fact, He's crazy about you.